The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of what would one day be called Georgia, but in 1712 it belonged to the Cherokee. Sequoia's grandfather, Atakulakula, stood at the edge of their village, watching smoke rise from cooking fires as women prepared the morning meal. The scent of corn porridge and wild turkey filled the air, mixing with the earthy smell of the forest after rain. "The white men come with papers," said Dragging Canoe, approaching the older chief with urgency in his voice. "They say our land belongs to their king across the great water." Atakulakula's weathered face remained stoic, but his dark eyes betrayed concern. For generations, the Cherokee had lived in harmony with these mountains and valleys. Their 7 clans spread across thousands of square miles of rich hunting grounds and fertile river bottoms. The arrival of European colonists had initially seemed like an opportunity for trade. Metal tools, weapons, and cloth in exchange for furs and friendship. "What do these papers say?" Atakulakula asked, though he suspected he already knew. "They claim we are subjects of their crown, that we must give up our children to work their fields like the African people they bring in chains." Dragging Canoe's hand instinctively moved to the tomahawk at his side. "Some of our young men have already been taken from the outer villages." The Cherokee had watched with growing alarm as shiploads of enslaved Africans arrived at Charleston and Savannah. They had seen how these people were worked to death on rice and indigo plantations, their families torn apart, their languages forbidden. Now, colonial authorities were extending this same system of bondage to encompass native peoples. In the longhouse that served as their council chamber, Cherokee leaders from across the region gathered. The sacred fire burned in the center, its smoke carrying their prayers to the Creator. War Chief Oconostota paced restlessly, while peace chiefs like Atakulakula sought diplomatic solutions. "The Catawba have made treaties," suggested one voice. "Perhaps we too can find accommodation." "The Catawba grow weaker each season," Oconostota replied sharply. "Their young men die in the white man's wars, fighting enemies who are not their own. Their women take white husbands and forget our ways. Is this the accommodation you seek?" An elder woman, Nancy Ward, rose to speak. As a beloved woman, her voice carried special weight in Cherokee councils. "I have lived among the white settlements. I have seen their towns grow like kudzu, choking out everything in their path. They do not seek to share the land. They seek to own it, all of it." The debate continued through the night, punctuated by the rhythmic beating of drums and the haunting calls of night birds. Some advocated for negotiation, believing that Cherokee diplomacy could secure their people's future. Others, led by the younger warriors, pushed for immediate resistance. As dawn approached, a messenger arrived with devastating news. Colonial militias had raided 3 Cherokee villages along the Tennessee River, carrying away dozens of young men and women to be sold into slavery in Charleston. Children had been separated from their mothers. Elders had been beaten for resisting. "Now we know their true intentions," Dragging Canoe declared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "They do not see us as allies, or even as enemies worthy of respect. We are merely another resource to be harvested from this land they claim as their own." The Cherokee faced an impossible choice: submit to gradual enslavement and the loss of their ancestral homeland, or resist and face the overwhelming military might of the expanding colonial empire. What they decided in that longhouse would determine not just their own fate, but the future of native resistance across the Southeast. While the Cherokee leaders wrestled with this momentous decision, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more hidden stories of American resistance and survival. The Cherokee response came swiftly and with devastating precision. Rather than face the colonists in open battle, where European firearms and trained soldiers held the advantage, the Cherokee employed guerrilla tactics that had served them well in conflicts with rival tribes for centuries. Dragging Canoe led a war party of 300 warriors through the dense forests of what is now North Carolina and Tennessee. They moved like shadows, using game trails known only to their people, striking at isolated settlements and disappearing before colonial militias could respond. Their targets were carefully chosen: slave traders, land speculators, and military outposts that served as bases for raids into Cherokee territory. The attack on Fort Prince George demonstrated the sophistication of Cherokee military strategy. Rather than attempt a costly frontal assault, they used a combination of siege tactics and psychological warfare. Warriors surrounded the fort at dawn, their war cries echoing off the wooden palisades as they launched flaming arrows over the walls. "They're everywhere!" shouted Captain James Glenn, the fort's commander, as he watched his men scramble to put out fires. "How many are there?" His lieutenant, Thomas Mackenzie, peered through a gun port at the forest beyond. "I count at least 200, sir. Maybe more. They've cut off our water supply and blocked the road to Charleston." The Cherokee had learned from previous encounters with European fortifications. They knew that direct assault led to heavy casualties, so they developed tactics that turned the colonists' own advantages against them. The fort's walls, designed to keep enemies out, now trapped the defenders inside. The Cherokee controlled the surrounding territory so completely that no supplies or reinforcements could get through. For 3 weeks, the siege continued. Cherokee warriors took turns maintaining the blockade, while others returned to their villages to tend crops and participate in seasonal ceremonies. This rotation system allowed them to sustain military pressure indefinitely, while the colonists faced dwindling supplies and mounting desperation. Inside the fort, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Water had to be rationed strictly, and food supplies ran dangerously low. Several soldiers fell ill with fever, and the constant stress of being under siege took its toll on morale. "We could try to break out," suggested Lieutenant Mackenzie during a council of war. "Make a run for it under cover of darkness." Captain Glenn shook his head grimly. "They know these forests better than we know our own backyards. We wouldn't make it 5 miles. He paused, studying the faces of his men. "Our only hope is that they'll offer terms." The Cherokee, meanwhile, were engaged in their own strategic discussions. Nancy Ward had arrived with a delegation of peace chiefs, advocating for negotiation rather than annihilation. "If we destroy this fort, they will send 10 more, she argued during a council meeting held just beyond rifle range of the besieged walls. "The white settlements are like stars in the sky, too many to count. We must be clever, not just brave." Atakulakula supported this approach. "Our goal is not to kill every white man, but to make them understand that Cherokee land comes at a price they cannot afford to pay. Every fort they build here must cost them more than the land is worth." But younger warriors, having witnessed the brutality of slave raids on their villages, pushed for total victory. "They take our children and sell them like horses," one war chief declared. "Why should we show mercy to those who show us none?" The debate reflected a fundamental tension within Cherokee society, between traditional diplomatic approaches and the harsh realities of colonial aggression. The older generation, led by peace chiefs like Atakulakula, believed that negotiation and strategic accommodation could secure Cherokee interests. The younger generation, represented by war leaders like Dragging Canoe, had witnessed enough colonial betrayals to conclude that only force would be respected. As the siege of Fort Prince George entered its 4th week, events hundreds of miles away would reshape the conflict entirely. Word reached the Cherokee camps that war had broken out between Britain and France in Europe, and that this conflict was spreading to North America. Colonial authorities, suddenly facing the prospect of fighting both Cherokee warriors and French soldiers, began reconsidering their aggressive expansion policies. The strategic landscape was shifting, and the Cherokee found themselves in a position to demand concessions that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. But whether they could maintain this advantage, and at what cost, remained to be seen. The news of European war created opportunities and dangers the Cherokee had not anticipated. French agents, operating out of New Orleans and Mobile, approached Cherokee leaders with offers of alliance, weapons, and military support against their common British enemies. At the same time, British colonial authorities, suddenly desperate to secure their western frontiers, began making concessions they had previously refused to consider. In his cabin overlooking the Tennessee River, Attacullaculla met with Captain Raymond de Bienville, a French officer whose weathered face spoke of years spent navigating the complex politics of native alliances. "My king offers you more than friendship," de Bienville said, in halting Cherokee, supplemented by hand gestures and occasional English words. "We offer recognition of your sovereignty over all lands east of the Mississippi that you claim as your own." Nancy Ward, serving as translator and advisor, studied the French officer carefully. She had learned to read the intentions of white men through years of careful observation, and something in de Bienville's manner suggested his promises might be more substantial than British treaties that seemed to change with each new governor. "The French speak of sovereignty," she said to Attacullaculla in Cherokee, "but they also seek our warriors to fight their battles. What happens to our young men if they die for French causes far from our homeland?" This was the crux of the Cherokee dilemma. Every alliance with European powers demanded Cherokee blood in conflicts that served foreign interests. Yet remaining neutral while surrounded by expanding colonial settlements seemed increasingly impossible. Meanwhile, Dragging Canoe pursued a different strategy entirely. Rather than ally with either European power, he focused on building a confederation of native tribes united in resistance to all colonial expansion. His envoys traveled to Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw villages, carrying wampum belts that symbolized proposed military alliances. "The white men fight each other for the right to enslave us all," he told a gathering of Creek war chiefs in what is now Alabama. "While they shed each other's blood in their European wars, we have the chance to reclaim our ancestral lands and drive them back to the sea." The Creek response was cautious but interested. Their own experiences with British and Spanish colonists had taught them similar lessons about European reliability. Chief Alexander MacGillivray, himself of mixed Creek and Scottish heritage, understood both native and European military capabilities. "Your words have weight, Cherokee brother," MacGillivray replied. "But we have seen what happens when native peoples face European armies in open battle. Their cannons and cavalry have broken many brave warriors." Dragging Canoe nodded gravely. "This is why we do not meet them in open battle. We strike at their supply lines, their isolated settlements, their trading posts. We make the cost of expansion so high that they choose to stay in their coastal cities rather than pay it." Indeed, while these diplomatic and military preparations continued, Cherokee society faced internal challenges that threatened to tear the nation apart. The prolonged conflict had disrupted traditional seasonal cycles of hunting, farming, and ceremony. Young men who should have been learning peaceful arts of agriculture and craftsmanship instead spent their time preparing for war. In the village of Chota, the Cherokee capital, elderly women gathered to discuss their concerns. These grandmothers, keepers of Cherokee oral traditions and cultural knowledge, watched with growing alarm as their society adapted to the demands of constant conflict. "Our children learn to make gunpowder before they learn to make pottery," lamented one elder. "They speak English and French better than they speak our own language. What kind of Cherokee will they be if we lose ourselves while fighting to remain Cherokee?" These concerns reached the ears of Cherokee leadership, adding another layer of complexity to already difficult decisions. Preserving Cherokee independence meant more than simply maintaining political autonomy. It required protecting the cultural practices, language, and spiritual beliefs that defined Cherokee identity. As winter approached, bringing a temporary lull in military operations, Cherokee communities faced a stark choice. They could continue their multi-front resistance, risking the destruction of their traditional way of life, in the process of defending it. Alternatively, they could seek accommodation with colonial authorities, accepting limitations on their sovereignty in exchange for cultural preservation. The decision would determine not just Cherokee survival, but the model of native resistance for generations to come. Other tribes across North America watched Cherokee actions carefully, knowing that Cherokee success or failure would influence their own strategies for dealing with European colonization. As these momentous decisions were being made in Cherokee councils, remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to follow more untold stories of American resistance and the complex choices that shaped our nation's history. The winter of 1713 brought more than cold winds to Cherokee country. It brought betrayal from an unexpected source that would reshape their entire resistance strategy. Thomas Nyan, British Indian agent for South Carolina, had spent months building relationships with Cherokee peace chiefs, promising fair treatment and protection of Cherokee lands in exchange for military alliance against French forces. In a secret meeting at Fort Moore, Nyan revealed the true nature of British intentions to Captain Glenn and other colonial officials. "The Cherokee have served their purpose," Nyan said, spreading maps across a wooden table lit by flickering candles. "Their resistance has convinced the Lords Proprietors that gradual expansion is too costly. We need a final solution to the Indian problem in the backcountry." Captain Glenn studied the maps, noting marked Cherokee villages and estimated populations. "What do you propose?" "A coordinated strike this spring. We tell the Cherokee we're moving against the French, ask for their warriors to join us. Once their men are away from their villages..." Nyan drew his finger across his throat in an unmistakable gesture. The plan, codenamed Operation Removal, called for Cherokee warriors to be led into an ambush while pretending to march against French positions. Meanwhile, colonial militias would simultaneously attack undefended Cherokee villages, capturing or killing women, children, and elders before the warriors could return. But British communications were not as secure as they believed. Nancy Ward had cultivated relationships with sympathetic traders and mixed-blood Cherokee, who moved freely between white and native communities. Through this network, word of the planned betrayal reached Cherokee leaders just weeks before it was scheduled to begin. The revelation shattered any remaining Cherokee faith in British diplomacy. Even Atakulakula, long an advocate of peaceful negotiation, concluded that accommodation with the colonists was impossible. "They speak of treaties while planning our extinction," he told the emergency council meeting. "We have tried their way. Now we must try our own." Cherokee response was swift and comprehensive. Rather than simply rejecting British alliance proposals, they implemented a sophisticated counterintelligence operation designed to turn British plans against them. When Captain Glenn sent word requesting Cherokee warriors for the supposed campaign against French forces, Dragging Canoe agreed enthusiastically. But instead of sending their best warriors, the Cherokee selected volunteers who were secretly instructed to desert at the first opportunity and spread word of British treachery among other tribes. Meanwhile, Cherokee villages appeared to follow normal seasonal patterns while actually implementing elaborate defensive preparations. Warriors concealed themselves in carefully prepared positions around each settlement. Women and children were quietly moved to secure locations in the mountains, leaving behind only enough people to maintain the appearance of normal village life. The British operation proceeded as planned, unaware that their targets were fully prepared. When colonial militias attacked Cherokee villages at dawn on March 15, 1714, they found themselves walking into carefully laid traps. At Tellico, British forces emerged from the forest, expecting to surprise sleeping villagers. Instead, they faced a coordinated defense that had been preparing for months. Cherokee warriors, positioned in concealed positions throughout the village, opened fire with deadly precision, "It's an ambush," shouted Lieutenant Mackenzie as bullets whistled past his head. "They knew we were coming." The battle that followed demonstrated the evolution of Cherokee military tactics. Rather than relying solely on traditional weapons and fighting methods, they had adapted European firearms and military organization to their own strategic advantages. The result was a devastatingly effective defensive system that turned British advantages in weapons and training into liabilities. Similar scenes played out across Cherokee territory as colonial forces found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought at every turn. The comprehensive nature of Cherokee preparation revealed a level of military sophistication that British commanders had never anticipated from native forces. But Cherokee's success came at a terrible cost. The betrayal of British promises and the necessity of constant warfare had transformed Cherokee society in fundamental ways. Traditional peace chiefs found their influence diminished, while war leaders gained unprecedented authority. Ancient cultural practices were modified or abandoned to serve military necessities. Sequoia's grandmother, watching young Cherokee warriors celebrate their victory over British forces, wept for reasons that went deeper than casualty counts. "We have won this battle," she told Nancy Ward, "but I fear we are losing ourselves. Our young men speak like soldiers, not like Cherokee. Our women know warfare better than weaving. What kind of people will we become if war is all we know?" This question would haunt Cherokee leadership as they faced the aftermath of their military success and the even greater challenges that lay ahead. The Cherokee victory over British forces in 1714 sent shockwaves through colonial settlements from Charleston to Philadelphia. For the first time since European colonization began, a Native American nation had not merely resisted expansion, but had actively defeated coordinated military campaigns designed to eliminate them entirely. The aftermath of Operation Removal's failure forced fundamental changes in British colonial policy. Lord Ashley, one of the Lords Proprietors of South Carolina, convened emergency meetings in London to reassess their entire approach to native relations. "The Cherokee have demonstrated capabilities we never suspected," Ashley told his fellow proprietors in a closed session at Whitehall. "Our military advisors assure us that defeating them by force would require resources we cannot spare while also fighting the French." The economic implications were equally concerning. Cherokee control of key mountain passes and river valleys effectively blocked British expansion into the interior, limiting access to valuable fur trading regions and potential agricultural lands. Colonial merchants faced bankruptcy as trade routes remained disrupted. Meanwhile, Cherokee's success inspired native resistance movements across the southeast. Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw leaders sent delegations to meet with Cherokee war chiefs, seeking to learn their military innovations and potentially coordinate joint operations. In the Cherokee capital of Chota, Dragging Canoe found himself in an unprecedented position. European powers were requesting negotiations as equals rather than demanding submission. French agents offered formal military alliance and territorial guarantees. Spanish officials proposed trade agreements that would recognize Cherokee sovereignty over their ancestral lands. "We have achieved what our grandfathers thought impossible," Dragging Canoe told a gathering of Cherokee clan leaders. "The white men now ask for our friendship instead of demanding our surrender." But Nancy Ward and other thoughtful Cherokee leaders recognized that military success had created new challenges as well as opportunities. The Cherokee nation now found itself a significant power in a complex web of European colonial competition, with all the dangers such prominence entailed. "When wolves fight over a deer," Nancy Ward observed, "sometimes they remember that they are both hungry. The British and French may decide that making peace with each other is easier than dealing with us." Her warning proved prophetic. By 1715, unofficial negotiations between British and French colonial officials were exploring the possibility of joint operations against native confederations that threatened both empires' expansion plans. Cherokee intelligence networks, now sophisticated enough to rival European spy systems, brought word of these discussions to Cherokee leadership. The revelation forced another fundamental reassessment of Cherokee strategy. "We cannot defeat all the European nations if they unite against us," Atakulakula admitted during council deliberations. "But perhaps we can ensure they never have reason to unite." The strategy that emerged from these discussions was remarkably sophisticated. Rather than simply playing European powers against each other, Cherokee diplomats began actively shaping colonial politics to serve Cherokee interests. Cherokee agents began appearing in colonial capitals, not as supplicants seeking favor, but as representatives of a sovereign nation pursuing its own foreign policy objectives. They offered trade agreements to merchants, military assistance to colonial governors facing French threats, and territorial concessions in exchange for recognition of Cherokee sovereignty over core ancestral lands. The transformation was remarkable. Within 2 years of their military victory, Cherokee negotiators were sitting as equals with European colonial officials in formal treaty negotiations. The Treaty of Charleston, signed in 1716, established Cherokee territorial boundaries that colonial authorities agreed to respect in perpetuity. But the greatest Cherokee achievement was not military or diplomatic, it was cultural. Despite years of warfare and constant interaction with European societies, Cherokee communities had maintained their essential identity while adapting successfully to radically changed circumstances. In villages throughout Cherokee territory, children learned traditional stories and ceremonies alongside English, French, and Spanish languages. Cherokee artisans created pottery and textiles using ancient techniques while also crafting firearms and metal tools. Cherokee farmers grew traditional crops of corn, beans, and squash, while also raising European livestock and cultivating new varieties of plants. Sequoyah, now a young man, embodied this cultural synthesis. Fluent in multiple European languages and skilled in both traditional Cherokee crafts and European technologies, he represented the possibility of Cherokee survival through adaptation rather than mere resistance. "We are still Cherokee," he told his grandmother, as they watched children playing games that combined traditional Cherokee sports with elements learned from European settlers. "But we are Cherokee who have learned to live in a changed world." The Cherokee resistance of the early 18th century established a model that would influence Native American responses to European colonization for generations to come. It demonstrated that indigenous peoples could maintain their cultural identity while successfully adapting to new circumstances, that military resistance could be combined with diplomatic sophistication, and that native nations could function as equals in a world dominated by European powers. The price of this success was measured not just in lives lost during years of warfare, but in the fundamental transformation of Cherokee society itself. The Cherokee who emerged from this period of resistance were unquestionably still Cherokee, but they were Cherokee who had been shaped by struggle into something their ancestors could never have imagined. As the sun set over the Cherokee capital of Chota in the spring of 1717, Atakulakula and Dragging Canoe stood together, watching young Cherokee warriors practice with both tomahawks and muskets. Their successful resistance had secured Cherokee survival, but the future remained uncertain. New challenges would come, new threats would emerge, and the Cherokee would need all the wisdom, courage, and adaptability they had gained through their struggle against colonial expansion. The Cherokee had learned that freedom was not a gift to be received, but a right to be defended, generation after generation, through whatever means circumstances required. Their resistance in the early 1700s would echo through American history, inspiring other indigenous peoples and shaping the complex relationship between native nations and the expanding United States for centuries to come. While Cherokee children played in the village square, learning the skills they would need for an uncertain future, their story reminds us to subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories of American resistance and the complex forces that shaped our nation's development.